Hello and welcome to a review of another film I missed from last year. The Lighthouse was written and directed by Robert Eggers and stars Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. It's simply about two lighthouse keepers who go insane whilst living on a remote island in the 1890s. I had high expectations going into this thing, and I have to say it's probably my favourite film of the decade. It's a truly unique and memorable film that is excellent in every aspect. First of all, the movie is marketed as a psychological horror film, but there are also elements of drama and dark comedy. For a horror movie, this is surprisingly funny. There are quite a few fart jokes, believe it or not, that have me laughing every time because the comedic timing is spot on. That being said, the comedy was never distracting or took away from the more serious and disturbing parts of the movie. In fact, all of the genres are mixed together brilliantly and make the film that much more unique. Like most great movies, the story is completely character driven. A lot of people might think this film is boring and not a lot happens because most of the time the film is just lengthy dialogue scenes. However, because the acting is so great and the dialogue is so well written, I found myself enjoying every minute of it. Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson give some of the best performances I've seen, especially Willem Dafoe, who fully transforms into his character. You would think a stereotypical pirate-like character would get annoying after a while, but because Willem Dafoe is so committed to the role, he manages to pull it off. Similarly, Robert Pattinson was very believable and his accent was convincing. When you only have two actors in your film and they take up so much of the runtime, it must be very difficult to step up to the plate because if their performances were shit, so would the movie. But honestly, you can't see anyone else playing these characters. I really like the dynamic between the two characters. One of them is a young man who mostly keeps to himself. The other is a much older lighthouse keeper who has been working there for years. Clearly, both of them have something to hide, and the movie does a great job of exploring this. It's not always obvious what each of the characters want, which makes them very mysterious. It's also interesting to see their relationship change as the film progresses. If you are planning on watching this, I suggest putting on subtitles because it is quite hard to understand what they're saying. To make the dialogue more realistic and accurate to the time period, the writers did a lot of research into old folk tales and the dialect of the time. When I started watching, I thought the dialogue would become irritating, but it actually added a lot more personality to the film. There are moments where the dialogue stands out as being quite poetic and theatrical. In particular, Willem Dafoe's memorable speech after Robert Pattinson insults his cooking. Despite the script being very tight, the actors had a lot of freedom to experiment during takes. There are scenes where both actors are really giving it their all, which was a lot of fun to watch.
There's hardly any scripts where you can go like, oh, I can really go mental.
There is something about the cinematography that is so unique and different from anything I've seen. Apart from being in black and white, the film is purposely shot in an almost square aspect ratio, which is not only interesting to look at, but also makes the movie feel a lot more claustrophobic. I really love the framing and composition. There are so many creative and beautiful shots that are so full of detail, especially the close-ups, which look fantastic. The scenes at night are very atmospheric because of the lighting choices. As the film progresses and gets more intense, so does everything else. From the acting to the music to the sound design and the weather, it all comes together brilliantly and creates a feeling of paranoia. The shots start to have a lot of movement and the camera angles are a lot more crazy and inventive. There are some really well edited montage sequences that are very disturbing. Usually when a movie has a dream sequence, it's very obvious, but in this film it's hard to tell what's real and what's not because everything is so realistic. The fantasy and horror elements of the film don't look fake at all. From what I can tell, they used a lot of practical effects. The production design is fantastic. The film was shot in a small fishing town called Cape Horseshoe. Apparently people have died there, but Robert Eggers insisted on shooting there anyway.
Every building that you see in the film was made for the film. We built a 70-foot lighthouse tower and the keeper's cottage and Craig Lathrop and his team did an incredible job. It was very difficult because the location, Cape Forshoe, is this outcropping of volcanic rock, and there were 3 nor'easters that blew over Forshoe while they were building this stuff.
Watching this, you would think they just found a location with a lighthouse because of how realistic everything looks. It's really impressive how the set pieces were built to fit the aspect ratio so they could get the shots they wanted, not to mention the excellent blocking. From the opening, the score really grabs your attention because of how intense it is. It really just slaps you across the face. The ominous opening shot paired with the brilliant music perfectly sets the tone for the rest of the film. The score doesn't have a main theme, instead it's used to create an eerie atmosphere and add to the paranoia. The movie has a runtime of around 2 hours, but the score is 36 minutes because they were smart and only used music when it was completely necessary. Most of the conversation scenes don't need music because the acting and dialogue is so effective without it. Also, the silence adds to the fact that they're isolated, so the music would have just taken away from that. Probably the most effective use of music is in the opening and closing of the film, which is extremely tense by the way, and easily one of the best scenes in the film. The sound design really brings the location to life and is quite overwhelming at times. One of the first things you hear is this blaring, repetitive foghorn sound that is distracting at first, but it's done in an effective way where it makes you feel like you're going mad, just like the characters. The weather also plays a big role in the film. We hear everything from the crashing of waves to the wind and the relentless rain. The weather is almost like an antagonist in the film because it's the reason they become stranded on this island and the reason they're so depressed and miserable all the time.
There's a lot of weather that's just real. I mean, the most effective one was when they're waiting for the tender on that rock, you know, that kind of dusky scene, and they're just there, you know, and we were just shielding the camera so it didn't, you know, because you have this vertical film magazine that's just a sail, right? So we're trying to like stabilize the camera, but all that, you know, that was just what it was, you know. So what they're there like this, we were there like this, you know.
Whenever Robert Pattinson is working in the lighthouse, you hear this loud clunking sound of the machinery, which has the same effect as the foghorn I mentioned earlier. This is a perfectly paced movie. Every scene is purposeful and adds something to the film. Despite the movie being mostly dialogue scenes, there is never a dull moment, and towards the end, you're on the edge of your seat. At one moment, I forgot I was watching a horror film and literally jumped out of my skin because it was so terrifying. That's a true story. The Lighthouse is one of the best horror films I've seen, and I would be happy calling this my favourite movie. For the longest time, Shawshank Redemption was my favourite, but then I saw all these other great films, and it's really hard to decide. That being said, I could watch this film over and over, and it would never get boring. Anyway, go watch The Lighthouse, form your own opinion, and I will see you in the next one.
It's of a merchant's daughter brought up in Callio. Hurrah, me other girls, who'd let me go. She took me in the parlor and said, won't you be me beau?